All right, let's talk about one of the biggest, most influential personal finance books ever written, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. This book is a giant. It sold, over 40 million copies? All with this promise of unlocking the secrets of the rich. But the big question we're asking today is it a real guide to wealth, or is it just a very, very clever gimmick? Let's dig in. You know, the book hooks you right away with this huge question. Why is it that some people just seem to get richer and richer, while so many of us feel like we're just running in place, stuck in that rat race? Kiyosaki's big claim is that it has nothing to do with your fancy degree or how many hours you work. Nope. He says it all comes down to your financial mindset. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the core ideas, the whole two dads story, the super important difference between assets and liabilities, and this thing he calls the cash flow quadrant. But then we're going to pivot and get into the really serious controversies around the book before we try to answer that big question. Is this thing a genuine guide, or is it just a great story? Okay, so the entire foundation of the book is this story about Kiyosaki's two dads. You've got his real dad, who he calls his poor dad. This guy was brilliant, highly educated, had a steady government job. And then you have his best friend's dad, the rich dad, who supposedly dropped out in the 8th grade but went on to become this super wealthy entrepreneur. And as you can imagine, they gave him completely different advice about money. And this right here is the whole thing in a nutshell. It's two totally different ways of looking at the world. The poor dad mindset is all about security. You know the drill. Go to school, get good grades, find a safe, secure job. But the rich dad, his philosophy was the complete opposite. It's all about breaking free from that paycheck to paycheck life by figuring out how to make your money work for you. So how do you actually do that? How do you make money work for you? Well, according to Kiyosaki, it all boils down to one simple but really profound idea. You have to understand the difference between an asset and a liability. Now that sounds pretty basic, right? But he argues this is the single most important piece of financial knowledge, and it's something that school just completely fails to teach us. Kiyosaki's definition of an asset is just brilliantly simple. An asset is anything that puts money into your pocket. Period. Think about a rental property that brings in cash every month, or stocks that pay dividends, or maybe a business that you own but don't have to run day to day. The goal, he says, is to just keep buying these things. And a liability? Well, you guessed it, it's the exact opposite. It's anything that takes money out of your pocket. So, your car payment, your credit card debt, and, well, this leads us to the book's most famous and, honestly, most controversial claim. Yep, you heard that right. Kiyosaki flat out says that for most people, their house is not their biggest asset. It's their biggest liability. And his logic is why? Because every single month, you've got the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, the repairs. All of it is just sucking money out of your pocket. It's not generating income. I mean, for a generation that was taught home ownership was the key to building wealth, this was just a mind-blowing, world-shattering idea. So, building on this asset and liability idea, Kiyosaki introduces this framework he calls the cash flow quadrant. It's basically a map to explain the different ways people earn money. And he says that whichever of these 4 categories you fall into, that pretty much dictates your whole financial life. The quadrant's broken into 2 sides, left and right. On the left, you've got E for employee and S for self-employed. On the right, you've got B for business owner and I for investor. And the whole theory is that where you sit on this grid just says everything about your relationship with money. Okay, so the left side is all about active income. This is where most people live. As an employee, you have a job, you're trading your time for a paycheck. Security is what you value most. As a self-employed person, think a doctor, a lawyer, a freelance artist. You own your job. Sure, you might have more freedom, but if you stop working, guess what? The money stops too. You're still just trading time for money. Now, the right side. This is where Rich Dad says the real magic happens. This is the land of passive income. As a business owner, you don't own a job, you own a system that makes money. And you hire smart people to run that system for you. And as an investor, your money is literally working for you 24/7. Kiyosaki's whole argument is that the key to real financial freedom is making the jump from the left side of this quadrant to the right. So the ideas are simple, they're sticky, they're powerful. But here is where the whole thing starts to get really complicated. Because for a book that's sold as nonfiction, there are some pretty serious questions about whether any of it is actually true. And the biggest question of all, the one that kind of threatens to bring the whole house of cards down, is this. Was Rich Dad even a real person? I mean, Kiyosaki's entire philosophy, his whole brand, is built on the lessons he supposedly learned from this one mentor. And as far as anyone can tell, no, he probably didn't exist. Journalists, investigators, they've all dug into this, and there is zero evidence to back up the story of this mysterious wealthy mentor, which really suggests that the book is less of a true story and more of a parable, a fictional tale meant to teach a lesson. And the plot thickens when you look at Kiyosaki's own financial life. The book makes him a superstar in 1997, but then in 2012, one of his main companies, Rich Global LLC, actually files for bankruptcy. And yet today, his personal net worth is estimated at around $100 million. Most of that coming from, you guessed it, selling books and seminars. And that bankruptcy, it was no small thing. His company was ordered by a court to pay nearly $24 million to a business partner, the guy who helped set up his big speaking appearances. When the company couldn't pay up, it filed for bankruptcy. But it's not just the story. The advice itself has gotten a ton of criticism. People point out that some of the things he seems to suggest, like getting insider stock tips, are flat out illegal. And his brand has been tied to these super high-cost seminars. We're talking up to $45,000 that a lot of people say are just high-pressure sales pitches. On top of that, a lot of financial pros say the book is just dangerously vague. It gets you all fired up but gives you no real concrete steps to take. I mean, some people really, really don't like this book. Financial journalist John T. Reed did not pull any punches. He called it one of the dumbest financial advice books I have ever read. He basically argues that Kiyosaki is just a salesman pushing a get-rich-quick fantasy. So, what are we supposed to do with all this? On one hand, you have a book based on a story that's likely made up, written by an author with a controversial past. And yet, millions and millions of people will tell you straight up that this book changed their life. And you just can't argue with the numbers. For all of its problems, Rich Dad, Poor Dad has had a massive global impact. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 6 years. It started a conversation about money for millions of people who had never thought about it before. So maybe it comes down to this. The book made finance exciting. It made it feel accessible. It made millions of people question that old go to school, get a job, work for 40 years plan. But the bad? It's built on a myth. Some of the advice is shaky at best. And it's definitely been used as a giant marketing funnel for some very expensive seminars. Which really brings us back to our final question. Is Rich Dad, Poor Dad a key to financial freedom? A book that genuinely shifts your mindset for the better? Or is it just a really entertaining financial fairy tale? Maybe it's inspirational, but in the end, it's a fantasy. It seems like the answer to that really depends on who you ask.